This is the Sleep Historian. Each night we explore the echoes of the past, stories told slowly to calm the mind and ease you towards sleep. If you enjoy these quiet journeys through time, please like and subscribe, and let the next story begin. Before dust, before gunfire, before stories harden into legend, there is space. Wide, dry, unmeasured space. The American West in the late 19th century stretches beneath a pale sky, light thinning as it moves across plains and broken hills. Wind slides through grass, lifting grit, settling it again on boots, sleeves, eyelashes. You stand at the edge of a place still becoming itself, where towns appear quickly and vanish just as fast. Distances deceive, shade is rare. Survival is not dramatic here. It is practical, fragile, and quiet. Measured in water carried, steps taken, and small choices made before the sun drops low. Time drifts to the 1870s and 1880s, when rail lines push westward and maps fill with new names. Newspapers speak of opportunity, land, and freedom, but the land does not listen. Days begin cold and end colder. Heat arrives suddenly and leaves without warning, as if the sky has changed its mind. You move through this world, aware that comfort is temporary and help is far away. Even towns feel unfinished, boards still smelling of sap, nails newly driven. The West promises room to breathe, but it also demands constant attention. Each morning carries a simple question, asked without words. How carefully will you move today, and how much will you carry with you? You wake before sunrise on open ground, the sky still cool and faintly blue. A blanket lies thin beneath you, stiff with dust. Nearby, a horse shifts its weight, leather creaking softly, and the sound feels close in the quiet. Water is already a concern. Canteens must last the day, and streams are unreliable, sometimes miles apart. As light spreads, the land reveals its scale. Hills that looked close are far. Every step presses grit deeper into your boots, and the sound follows you in a steady rhythm. This is not a place that carries you. It asks you to carry yourself, minute by minute. By mid-morning, the sun settles into its work. Heat gathers on your shoulders and neck, sinking through cloth, and the horizon begins to waver with a thin shimmer. Trails are suggestions more than paths, marked by wheel ruts or broken grass that can vanish after a night of wind. A small misjudgment can stretch into hours. Your mouth dries quickly, lips crack. Even breathing feels heavier in the still air. Somewhere far off, a bird calls once, then goes quiet again. The West is not empty, but it is indifferent. It offers no signs meant for you. You learn to read shadows, wind, and the slow arc of the sun. Shelter becomes a careful calculation. A stand of cottonwoods along a creek offers brief relief, their leaves whispering softly, cool shade falling in narrow strips. But creeks flood without warning, and trees draw insects that bite and burrow. Night brings a sharp change. Temperatures drop quickly, and cold settles into your wrists and ankles first. Firewood must be gathered before dark, hands scraping bark, fingers numbing as evening comes on. Sparks jump and fade as you coax flame from flint. The fire warms one side of your body and leaves the other exposed. Sleep arrives in fragments, interrupted by distant sounds you cannot place. Food is uncertain and often monotonous. Hard bread, salted meat, beans boiled until soft. Fresh food spoils quickly, and hunting takes time and ammunition, both limited. A missed shot is more than disappointment. It is waste that follows you. You eat slowly, aware of each bite and swallow. The body adapts, conserving energy, dulling hunger into something manageable. But weakness creeps in quietly. A hand trembles slightly when you lift a cup. Legs tire sooner than expected. Even your thoughts feel slower in the afternoon heat. The West does not announce deprivation. It lets it accumulate, small and steady, until strength becomes something you remember rather than feel. Illness arrives without ceremony. A cut turns angry and swollen. A cough deepens in cold air. Fever blurs days together until morning and evening feel like the same gray band of time. Doctors are scarce, and treatments vary widely from town to town. You sit near a fire, watching embers settle, waiting for strength to return. Laudanum dulls pain but clouds thought. Alcohol disinfects but weakens. Many remedies rely on hope as much as knowledge. The smallest injury can reshape a life here, not suddenly but through slow, relentless change. Survival depends less on bravery than on timing and luck, and on whether someone nearby notices you fading before you fade too far. Travel continues because it must. Wagons creak under their loads, axles groaning as wheels bite into dirt. Dust coats everything, fine and persistent, settling into seams of clothing and the corners of eyes. It tastes faintly metallic by late afternoon. Rivers must be crossed carefully, water rising against hubs, current tugging at legs. One misstep sends supplies drifting away, unreachable in the brown rush. Nights bring exhaustion that feels heavier than the packs you carry. You lie back and watch stars emerge, sharp and countless, as if the sky has been scrubbed clean. The horizon offers no fence line, no street lamp, no easy direction, only distance. As weeks pass, routine replaces novelty. You learn to move early and rest at midday, when heat becomes a weight that presses down on thought. You check gear by touch, counting items without looking, listening for the right sound when metal meets metal. Small efficiencies matter. A knot tied well, a shoe repaired before it fails, a match kept dry in folded paper. These are quiet acts of survival, unnoticed by anyone else. The West rewards attention, not speed. Those who rush often become stories told later around fires, the endings softened by time. You move steadily instead, reading clouds, tasting wind, noticing how silence changes when weather is about to shift. By the time a town appears, low buildings clustered near a water source, it feels unreal. Smoke lifts from chimneys. A bell rings once. Voices drift outward, thin but unmistakably human. And relief arrives in the body before it reaches the mind. You step onto a boardwalk, boots thudding on wood, and feel the ground shift beneath you after weeks of earth and grass. Towns promise supplies and rest, but they bring new dangers. Crowds gather quickly, tempers rise. Disease spreads through shared rooms and shared water. Survival does not end at settlement. It changes shape. The land gives way to people, and people are often less predictable than weather. Morning in a frontier town begins with sound. Doors creak open. Horses snort and stamp. A hammer strikes metal somewhere nearby, steady and hollow, as a farrier works by habit. Buildings stand close together, boards sun-bleached and uneven, with dust caught in every seam. After weeks of open land, space feels compressed. Everyone is near, watching, listening, assessing. Supplies are traded quickly. Flour weighed, ammunition counted, water drawn from barrels that must last until the next delivery. Money changes hands, often in silence. A clerk's pencil moves across a ledger, pausing once, then continuing. The town feels temporary, as if it could pack itself up and leave overnight. Stability here is an agreement, not a fact. Work fills the day. If you find it, you take it. Digging, hauling, repairing, stacking, sweeping. Pay is small and irregular, handed over in coins that feel warm from someone else's pocket. Injuries are common. A slipped tool, a spooked horse, a misjudged load. Sweat darkens shirts by mid-morning. Hands blister and split, and the grit under your nails never fully leaves. There is no safety net beyond what people offer each other, and generosity has limits. You pause to drink, feeling dust between your teeth, water lukewarm and precious. Labor keeps you fed, barely. It also keeps you visible, part of a fragile web that holds the town together until the next drought, the next price crash, the next fever. Law exists, but unevenly. A marshal may be present or not. Jurisdiction is unclear, records incomplete, and the distance between rules and enforcement can be measured in miles. Justice, when it comes, often arrives late, shaped by whoever has the most friends close by. Disputes settle themselves quickly, sometimes with fists, sometimes with weapons drawn more to intimidate than to kill. Still, accidents happen. A shot fired in anger travels farther than intended. You keep your distance, choosing silence over involvement. Even so, tension hums beneath ordinary moments. A conversation pauses too long. A hand rests near a holster. Survival includes reading rooms as carefully as landscapes, sensing when to drift away before trouble hardens into certainty. Night brings a different rhythm. Lamps glow behind windows, light softened by dust-coated glass. Music drifts from saloons, uneven and loud, spilling into the street like warm breath into cool air. Inside, heat builds quickly, bodies pressed close, the smell of whiskey and sweat mixing with smoke. Cards slap tables, laughter rises and falls. Somewhere, a glass breaks, and a brief hush follows before talk returns. You nurse a drink slowly, aware of its effect. Too much invites mistakes. Too little marks you as an outsider. When you step back outside, the air feels cooler and cleaner. The street is wider at night, shadows deeper, and the sky above holds more stars than any city allows. You walk carefully, listening for footsteps behind you that match your pace. Sleep is light and fragmented. Rooms are shared, walls thin, mattresses stuffed unevenly. You lie on a narrow bed, listening to sounds filter through. Boots on boards, distant voices, a horse stamping, the soft clink of a lantern chain. The smell of oil clings to blankets. Dreams come and go, shallow and quick. You wake often, checking belongings by touch, reassured by familiar shapes. Morning arrives without ceremony, light slipping through gaps in shutters. Another day begins. The West does not offer rest so much as pauses between effort. Recovery is partial. Fatigue accumulates, stored in muscles and joints, shaping how long you can keep moving at all. Disease spreads quietly through towns. Crowded rooms and shared water carry coughs and fevers from one body to another. News travels slowly, and by the time illness is recognized, it has often already moved through a boarding house, a saloon, a church gathering. You notice it in small ways. A familiar face absent from the street, a bed left empty, a shop closed with no explanation. Funerals are brief, practical, with hats held against wind and words kept spare. Life continues because it must. The West absorbs loss without stopping. Each absence leaves a small gap, quickly filled by someone new arriving with their own hopes, unaware of the space they now occupy. A nurse rinses a cloth in a basin, wrings it out, and keeps going. Outside town, ranches and camps form loose networks. Fences stretch thinly across land, easily broken by weather or wandering herds. Cattle move in slow waves, dust rising around their hooves, settling again on saddles and hats. Cowboys ride long hours, bodies swaying with the gait of their horses. Water holes become gathering points, and with them come conflict. Scarcity sharpens disputes. A dry season turns neighbors into rivals, and even friendships feel strained by the simple arithmetic of survival. You watch clouds build and fade without rain, feeling tension rise with the heat. The land sets the terms. People respond, often poorly. Survival depends on cooperation that is fragile and easily undone by hunger or fear. Railroads push through, steel cutting across plains. Towns cluster around tracks, growing fast and uneven, as if drawn by gravity. With them come new dangers. Machinery injures. Schedules demand speed. Workers rush. Mistakes multiply. And a moment's inattention becomes a lasting scar. You stand near a platform as a train roars past, noise overwhelming, hot wind and soot washing over your face. The ground vibrates under your boots. Progress feels loud and indifferent. It promises connection, but it brings crowds, competition, and a different kind of pressure. The West is changing but not softening. New tools replace old ones, yet the demands remain the same. Attention, endurance, and luck. A conductor's watch clicks softly in his palm as he checks the time again. Time widens, and patterns begin to repeat across decades. Migration surges, slows, surges again. Wet years give way to drought, then return, never on a schedule that feels fair. You feel this rhythm in the way supplies fluctuate and prices jump overnight, as if the town's mood is tied to distant markets and distant rains. One week flour is plentiful, the next scarce and expensive. Information arrives late and incomplete, carried by travelers or newspapers that have already aged on the road. Decisions are made with partial knowledge. Survival here means accepting uncertainty as constant. You adjust plans daily, sometimes hourly. The West teaches flexibility not as a virtue, but as a necessity carved into routine. A hand smooths a creased map, tracing a route that may no longer exist as it was drawn. Violence is less constant than stories suggest, but its possibility shapes behavior. You hear about shootings more often than you see them, told secondhand with details shifting each time. Still, the presence of firearms changes posture, distance, and tone. Guns are tools as much as weapons, carried openly, handled casually, cleaned with the same attention as a shovel blade. Accidents injure more people than duels. A startled horse, a careless trigger, a misjudged boast. You notice scars on hands, missing fingers, a limp that never quite heals. These marks tell quiet stories. They remind you that danger often arrives without warning or intention. Survival includes learning how to stand, where to sit, and when to leave a room without explanation. A thumb rubs a worn brass cartridge, feeling its smooth edge like a small, cold promise. Women and families endure a different set of pressures, often heavier and less visible. Domestic labor is constant. Water hauled, clothes scrubbed, food preserved, children watched near open fires and restless animals. The day begins early and rarely feels finished. Even rest has a list attached to it. Childbirth is risky, frequently attended by neighbors rather than doctors. Loss is common and spoken about with restraint, as if too many words might invite more. You see strength expressed in small actions, a dress mended again, a meal stretched to feed one more person, a child's hair smoothed back with a wet hand. Survival here is not loud. It unfolds quietly inside homes and tents, in routines repeated until they hold together a life under pressure. A kettle whistles softly, and someone turns it down before it boils over. Indigenous nations experience the West differently and more violently as expansion accelerates. Treaties are made, broken, remade, and ignored. Displacement spreads like a slow tide, pushing communities from familiar hunting grounds, rivers, and seasonal routes. The change is visible in altered trails and empty spaces where camps once stood. You pass lands where people once moved freely, now constrained by force and policy. The land remembers, even when newcomers do not. Survival for these communities becomes resistance, adaptation, and endurance under constant pressure. Their knowledge of the environment remains deep: water sources, seasons, medicines, but access narrows. The West's growth carries costs measured not only in hardship, but in lives and cultures disrupted beyond repair. A hand tightens around a small pouch of dried herbs, carried like memory. Weather remains the great equalizer. Storms rise quickly, darkening the sky without warning. Wind tears at canvas and lifts roofs with a sound like ripping cloth. Rain turns roads into mud that grips wheels and boots alike, making every mile feel twice as long. Lightning cracks close, bright enough to show every fence post and blade of grass for an instant. Sometimes, fire follows. Dry grass catches, and flame runs faster than a person can. You crouch low, covering your face, feeling heat press close, hearing a faint crackle like paper being crumpled. When the storm passes, the land is changed. Burned patches mark where life paused. Survival requires rebuilding, again and again. The West does not reward permanence. It tolerates it briefly, then tests it relentlessly. Isolation weighs heavily. Mail arrives sporadically, carried by riders who look older than they should. News from the East feels distant and abstract, as if it belongs to another century. Time is measured by seasons and tasks completed, not by calendars pinned to walls. Loneliness settles in during long evenings when the fire burns low and conversation fades. You listen to wind move through gaps in walls, carrying sounds you cannot identify. The mind fills silence with memory and worry. Survival includes managing thought as much as environment. You learn to narrow focus to immediate needs: water, food, shelter, letting larger questions drift away for now. A letter is unfolded, read twice, then folded again with careful fingers, as if the paper itself might hold warmth. As years pass, bodies age quickly under constant strain. Joints stiffen. Sun and wind mark skin. Injuries never fully heal, settling into the body like quiet companions. You notice it in the way older settlers move carefully, conserving motion, choosing each bend and lift as if it costs something real. Stories are told more often now, not to entertain, but to place meaning around effort. A man rubs his knuckles before gripping a tool. A woman pauses to straighten her back, eyes closed for a moment, then continues. Survival shifts from expansion to maintenance. Keeping what you have becomes harder than gaining more. The West offers few gentle endings. It wears people down slowly, through repetition and exposure, and still asks for one more day's work. And yet people stay. Some leave, many do not. The reasons vary: land claimed, families formed, graves tended, promises made to the living and the dead. Attachment grows subtly, rooted in effort spent and sacrifices that cannot be undone. The West becomes familiar, not safe, but known. At dusk, you stand and watch light drain from the sky, the air cooling with surprising speed. A fence line cuts across the land in a thin, patient stroke. A porch lamp flickers once before holding steady. Weariness settles, but so does a quiet recognition. You have learned this place's moods. Survival here is not a triumph shouted out. It is the slow, stubborn act of fitting yourself into a landscape that never fully accepts you, yet allows you to remain if you keep paying attention. Daily life settles into patterns that feel almost calm. Morning chores, midday labor, evening meals. Routine softens edges, creating an illusion of stability. You sweep a floor, mend a strap, count supplies, and each small task feels like a stitch holding the day together. Outside, wind moves steadily, carrying dust in thin sheets. Animals graze, heads low, untroubled. The West seems to pause, holding its breath. But beneath routine, fragility remains. A broken tool, a missed delivery, a sudden illness can unravel weeks of careful balance. Calm here is real, but provisional, like a lantern flame sheltered by cupped hands. You feel it in the way you glance at the water barrel before you sit down, checking its level without thinking. Foreshadowing appears in small signs. Clouds gather out of season. A creek runs lower than it should. Prices rise without explanation, and a shopkeeper weighs flour with a look that lingers on the scale a moment too long. You notice these shifts, but cannot always act on them. Information travels slowly, and choices are limited. Still, you adjust what you can. Store a little extra food, repair gear early, keep a spare harness strap rolled tight. A neighbor leaves suddenly, selling belongings cheaply, smiling as if nothing is wrong. You watch their wagon disappear into dust and feel a quiet tightening in your chest. Survival depends on reading these subtle changes without panic and without denial. Balance is delicate. The West rewards neither fear nor complacency, only steady attention. Children adapt quickly, playing among hazards with an ease that feels both hopeful and unsettling. They know where not to step, when to stay close, which boards creak near the edge of a porch. Their laughter carries briefly, then fades as wind takes it away. Childhood here is shorter, shaped by responsibility. A small hand learns to pump water. A young voice learns to quiet itself when adults speak. Survival lessons are absorbed early, without formal teaching, simply by watching and doing. A child learns by making mistakes that must remain small. The land educates constantly, without regard for age. You see it in a scraped knee cleaned with a wet cloth, in a stern warning softened by a quick touch on the shoulder. Community gatherings offer brief relief. A shared meal, a dance, a church service held in a simple hall where boards smell of fresh pine and lamp smoke. Light pools warmly around faces, and for a while, shoulders drop and voices soften. Music steadies breath and thought. Boots move in slow patterns across the floor, dust rising, then settling again. Someone passes a plate, fingers lingering a moment as if to say quietly, "We are still here." These moments matter. They restore something worn thin by constant vigilance, yet awareness remains. You notice the weather through windows. You listen for the distant shift of wind. Survival does not switch off. It simply rests briefly, like a horse standing still with ears still turning. Seasonal change brings new tests. Winter tightens and cold slips through walls, finding every crack. Snow blocks roads, isolating towns until the world feels smaller and quieter. Supplies dwindle. You ration carefully, counting days until thaw, measuring portions by habit rather than appetite. Breath fogs indoors. Firewood disappears faster than expected, and the sound of an axe becomes part of the day. Then summer returns with heat and insects. Water turns sour if left too long. Flies gather, and illness moves through households in a slow, stubborn line. Each season presses on a different weakness. The body adapts, but only so far. Survival requires adjusting expectations as much as behavior, accepting discomfort as part of the landscape rather than an interruption. A hand tests the stove's warmth, then closes the door gently to keep the heat inside. Technology advances slowly and unevenly, arriving in pieces rather than as a clean transformation. A new pump promises steady water, but grit jams the mechanism. A plow is sharper than the last, yet the soil breaks it all the same. Repairs require improvisation. Wire twisted tight, a hinge fashioned from scrap, a handle whittled smooth from a branch. You learn to value simplicity. Complex systems struggle here, where parts are scarce and travel is slow. Progress arrives, but it does not replace effort. It layers over it, adding new points of failure alongside new possibilities. A man kneels in the dirt, turning a broken gear in his hands, listening for the faint click that tells him where it caught. He spits dust from his mouth, wipes his brow, and tries again. As days shorten, tension rises subtly. Storms approach more frequently, and the sky begins to change its moods without warning. Animals grow restless. Horses startle at smaller sounds. People speak less, conserving energy, storing their words like supplies. You feel it in your own body, a tightening, a readiness that never fully relaxes. The West feels closer now, pressing in rather than stretching out, and even familiar streets seem narrower beneath low clouds. Survival becomes inward, focused on holding steady through whatever comes next. You prepare quietly, stacking wood, sealing gaps with cloth, checking a lantern wick, counting matches. A neighbor knocks once to borrow something small, then stands a moment too long on the porch, as if listening for what the wind might say. Night falls earlier and darker. Lamps flicker, and shadows deepen along boardwalk edges. Wind rattles boards, making a steady, restless music, and dust slips under doors no matter how carefully you try to block it. You sit near the fire, hands extended, feeling heat reach skin slowly. Outside, the land waits, unchanged, and the silence between gusts feels almost heavy. Inside, you wait as well, listening for sounds that signal safety or trouble. A roof shifting, a horse stamping, a distant shout that fades quickly. The West offers no reassurance beyond what you create for yourself. Calm exists, but it is earned daily, rebuilt each evening, fragile and necessary. A kettle ticks softly as it cools, each small sound clear in the early dark. Deep calm settles in the hours before dawn. The world feels suspended, breath held between night and morning. You wake briefly, not startled, just aware, and listen. The fire has burned low, embers glowing faintly like tiny red stones. Cold presses in around the edges of the room. This quiet carries weight, not peace. It is the stillness that often comes before change. Survival depends on recognizing it without fear, on letting your senses stay open without letting your thoughts race. You lie still, conserving warmth, feeling your own breath move slowly. Somewhere outside, a sign creaks once, then stops. A horse snorts softly in the dark. Light has not yet arrived, but you can feel it approaching, patient and inevitable. Approaching turning points often look ordinary at first. A rumor spreads of trouble nearby. A herd moves unexpectedly. A stranger rides into town and asks too many careful questions. The air feels the same. The street looks the same. Yet a small thread of tension runs beneath the day. You sense momentum building, though its direction is unclear. Decisions made now will matter later. You check gear, speak briefly with others, adjust plans without explaining. A hand tightens a saddle strap and then checks it again, as if the second touch might prevent what the first could not. The West rarely announces its crises. They arrive wrapped in routine, disguised as minor disruptions. Survival favors those who notice the difference between an ordinary quiet and an uneasy quiet. One turning point gathers in the early 1880s as cattle drives intensify and rail towns swell. Competition sharpens, resources strain. A sense of crowding appears even in wide places, as if too many needs are pressing against the same few supplies. You feel it in prices, in shorter tempers, in the way conversations stop when someone new steps close. You witness an argument escalate. Voices rise, then fall into a dangerous calm. Hands tighten, and the air feels suddenly thin. It ends quickly, leaving one person injured and another gone into the dusk. The town absorbs it and moves on, but the change remains. Survival now includes navigating a landscape shaped not only by weather, but by human pressure, pride, and exhaustion. A broom scrapes broken glass into a pile, slow and methodical, as if tidying can restore what is shifted. Economic currents pull quietly at the edges of life. A far-off market collapses. Rail fees change. A mine that fed the town closes, and wages vanish as if turned off by a hand you cannot see. You feel it first in small things. Fewer deliveries, less meat in the stew, more empty chairs at a table. Storefronts go dark. Men linger on corners longer, hands in pockets, eyes narrowed against the sun. A shopkeeper stops offering credit. Work becomes scarce, and the scarcity carries its own tension, making small disputes sharper. You adapt again, finding labor where you can, moving if necessary, keeping possessions light enough to lift alone. Stability proves temporary, shaped by forces far beyond any single person's effort. A ledger sits open on a counter, numbers penciled in, then crossed out, then written again. Nature brings its own turning point, heavy and unquestionable. A severe winter arrives unexpectedly, remembered later as the kind that closes a door behind it. Snow falls and does not leave. Wind cuts across open land, turning drifts into hard shapes that catch at wagon wheels and fence posts. Livestock perish, supplies run low. You move slowly, conserving energy, keeping tasks small and necessary. The cold is constant, pressing into every space, even beside the stove. Survival becomes communal or impossible. People share what little remains, wood, food, blankets, because no one can endure alone for long. The land reminds everyone of its authority quietly, without anger, simply by continuing. A mittened hand knocks ice from a bucket, the sound dull and heavy. When the worst begins to ease, the cost becomes visible. Empty buildings sit with doors that no longer swing open. Fence lines sag where posts have shifted. The town feels quieter, not peaceful but thinned. You notice the missing faces first, then the missing sounds. Fewer hoofbeats, fewer voices, fewer small arguments that once filled daylight. Survival has claimed its price. You feel it in your body, in a persistent ache that does not leave, in a cough that returns with the cold. Memory surfaces in ordinary moments, uninvited, like smoke slipping through a crack. The West continues, indifferent to individual outcomes. It neither celebrates resilience nor mourns loss. It simply remains. A woman folds a blanket more slowly than before, fingers lingering on frayed edges as if counting what is left. Recovery is slow and uneven, like grass returning after fire. People rebuild where they can, patching roofs, setting posts again, reopening a shop with fewer goods on the shelves. Plans grow smaller. Expectations drop, not as defeat, but as a way to keep going without breaking. Life resumes, altered. Survival shifts from endurance to reflection. You notice what you value now. Reliable water, a steady roof, familiar voices that answer when you call. The West has stripped away excess, leaving essentials stark and clear. Even celebration, when it comes, is quiet. A shared pot of coffee tastes richer. A warm room feels like a gift. You sit on a step at dusk and watch smoke rise straight from a chimney in still air, grateful for a simple sign that this night will hold. Time moves on, carrying the West toward a new century. Railroads expand, laws solidify. Some towns stabilize, building schools and churches that look less temporary. Others fade, their names remaining only on old maps and in stories told by people who once walked their streets. Survival becomes less immediate for some, though never effortless. The landscape changes, but traces of hardship remain etched into place and body. Scarred hands, worn tools, weathered wood. You feel the shift in the pace of life, a slightly steadier rhythm, and yet the old rules linger beneath it. Water still matters, weather still decides, distance still stretches longer than it looks. A child watches a train disappear into the horizon and then turns back toward home, dust on their cheeks, eyes bright with a future that still demands care. The turning point resolves into legacy. The Wild West, as lived, fades into memory, even as its image hardens into myth. Stories simplify what was complex, dramatize what was often ordinary. Survival becomes something admired from a distance, polished into legend, and repeated until the edges shine. Yet the reality remains embedded in land and records, in weathered tools and worn paths. You stand at the edge of this transition, feeling history settle like dust after a wagon passes. An old man rests his palm on a porch rail, eyes half closed, and the gesture holds a whole lifetime of effort. The West does not vanish. It changes form. It becomes a set of lessons carried forward, often without being named. Reflection widens the view. Survival here was never only about visible danger. It was about accumulation, fatigue stored in muscles, small errors compounding, supplies thinning, weather shifting in ways you could not control. The West tested limits slowly and persistently, like water wearing a groove into stone. It rewarded attention more than bravado, cooperation more than loneliness. Those who lasted did so through adaptability and restraint, not through spectacle. You think of the quiet skills that mattered: reading clouds, maintaining tools, keeping relationships intact when stress made everything sharper. A hand tightens a jar lid, saving the last of something for later, and the small motion feels like the true shape of endurance. The myth is loud, the reality is careful. Modern life reframes the past without erasing it. Roads shorten distances that once took weeks. Clean water flows with the turn of a tap. Medicine works more often than it fails. Communication arrives instantly, not by a rider appearing at dusk with a folded paper in his pocket. You recognize how thin the margin once was. A broken bone, a missed supply, a harsh winter could pull a life apart. Survival depended on factors now taken for granted, and the contrast is quiet but profound. It does not make the past glamorous. It makes it human. You picture a feverish child cooling under a damp cloth, a neighbor bringing soup without being asked, a lantern held steady in a shaking hand. In those moments, the West is not a stage. It is a place where people did their best with what they had. Artifacts carry the story forward in a gentle, physical way. Journals with smudged ink, tools worn smooth where hands held them, a boot heel scuffed down unevenly, buildings leaning slightly, boards darkened by decades of weather and smoke. Each object holds traces of ordinary struggle. You imagine the gestures that once surrounded these things. A letter folded and refolded until the crease became permanent. A knife sharpened by lamplight. A child's name written in careful script on a school slate. These objects anchor memory, grounding myth in material reality. Survival leaves marks, not always dramatic but enduring. A wooden chair creaks under weight, and the sound feels like a voice from another time, speaking without words. The land itself carries legacy. Trails become roads. Rail lines become corridors of towns. Some places grow into cities. Others disappear back into grass and wind. Weather patterns persist, indifferent to borders and names. You feel continuity beneath change, like a deep current under surface ripples. The West remains challenging, though in different ways. Floods still come. Drought still tightens the ground. Heat still presses down in July. And winter still arrives with sharp nights. Survival lessons adapt but do not vanish. The land continues to ask for attention, patience, and humility. A fence post stands in open space, sun-bleached and quiet, marking someone's attempt to make a boundary in a place that does not naturally hold them. Looking back, the question shifts. Not why you wouldn't survive a day, but how anyone survived at all. The answer is quiet, unsatisfying to legend, but true. People endured through countless small acts, repeated under strain day after day, when quitting was not always an option. They saved water, they repaired tools, they watched the sky, they leaned on neighbors. They learned which risks were worth taking and which were not. Survival was ordinary and constant, a steady tide of decisions that rarely felt heroic in the moment. A man lifts his hat to wipe his brow, then sets it back carefully, as if the simple act of keeping going deserves that small respect. The West did not demand greatness, it demanded steadiness. Memory softens edges over time. Hardship becomes story. Danger becomes backdrop. The West is retold until it fits in a neat shape, and what does not fit is filed away. Yet beneath narrative, the lived experience remains, quiet and stubborn, like a scar that still aches in cold weather. You sense it in the way silence stretches in open country, in the weight of distance, in the simple fact that nature does not negotiate. The West taught patience, attention, and humility. And those lessons persist, subtly, shaping how people think about effort and risk. An old photograph sits in someone's hand, edges worn. The faces in it stare back calmly, not posing for myth, only for a moment of record. As the story settles, the Wild West stands not as a place of constant spectacle, but of endurance. Survival was never guaranteed. never dramatic by default. It was earned daily through care, restraint, and a clear-eyed respect for what could go wrong. The land demanded steadiness and punished distraction. Towns offered community and conflict in the same breath. Weather, illness, and scarcity shaped lives more than any famous gunfight ever did. And still, people found small joys: warm coffee, a safe roof, a song drifting out into night air. You hold the full arc now, from open plains to crowded rail towns, from harsh winters to quiet legacies. The West becomes a reminder that survival is often the calm work of showing up again tomorrow and doing the next necessary thing. Let your thoughts drift now across that wide landscape once more. Dust moving in thin sheets, wind combing through grass. The slow rhythm of days, shaped by necessity, not by drama. Picture the small moments: a knot tied carefully, a measured sip of water, a lantern wick trimmed with patient fingers. These acts held lives together. They were quiet, repeated, and deeply human. As the image softens, notice how effort gives way to rest. The West recedes, its lessons lingering like faint smoke after a fire has gone out. What remains is a gentle understanding. Survival was built from attention, from community, and from small choices made in ordinary light. Let that understanding settle without weight, like dust falling back to earth. Return gently to your own space. The ground beneath you is stable. The air is calm. Sounds are familiar and close, no longer carried across miles of open land. Whatever is outside your room tonight is held at a safe distance, softened by walls and warmth. The hardships of another time settle into memory, distant and contained. Here you are supported by comforts built slowly over generations: steady shelter, clean water, light that arrives with a switch. Let your breathing slow. Let your shoulders loosen. The wide land grows quiet again, and rest comes easily now. The story fades like footsteps on a boardwalk, growing softer until there is only stillness and sleep waiting patiently.